Hello everyone, it's great to see you all here today to this very well attended talk. I wasn't expecting so many people. I was just thinking about why so many people are coming today when Ivana was giving her introduction. And I think the reason why is because Carl Jung, he speaks a language that resonates with all of us. He speaks to us directly, inwardly, that many other people and thinkers haven't done so in recent times. It was normal in ancient times, ancient traditions, ancient philosophies to address the deeper questions we have inside ourselves. And that today is something that we're lacking in our society. And Carl Jung is one of the first kind of pioneers who looks inwardly and tries to answer those deeper questions we all have. Near the end of Carl Jung's life, America was planning to send a man to the moon. And it was a great project of courage and determination to go into outer space. But Carl Jung, for the previous 50 years, was spent time going inwards into his own inner journey, inside himself, to understand the world of the human psyche. And Carl Jung said that the psyche encompasses all one's thoughts, behaviors, feelings, and emotions. And Carl Jung used a scientific method to try to understand this mystery of the psyche. And he used it very well to understand it. And it was a method that was gaining more popularity in this 18th, 19th, 20th century. But some people, despite him being called a scientist, some people called him a mystic as well, which he didn't like being called. He didn't like being called a mystic. And because science and mysticism tend to seem to be separate or disconnected, but they're not. And Carl Jung wasn't satisfied with this limited view of the human being. He thought there was more to the human being than our biology. He thought there was something deeper, something higher, something more elevating. And he wanted to explore the human psyche, or that inner world for ourselves, with all its different facets. And a lot of people didn't like this. They felt uncomfortable with it. Because Carl Jung thought that the human being has a body, but we also have something he calls the spirit. Okay? So this is our body. What combines those two worlds is called the psyche. This is a study of psychology. So within the human being, we have something that's temporal, something that's temporal is something that ages, but there's also something that's timeless, something that is universal, something that continues after death. What combines these three worlds is called consciousness. And Carl Jung, in his works, explains the psyche from the perspective of biology, but also from the perspective of the spiritual. Okay? So in this talk, I'm going to try to understand Carl Jung's life a little bit more, understand some of his teachings, but understanding his teachings from the perspective of how we can learn more about ourselves. This is not an intellectual discussion. This is a very practical talk on how we can actually apply what he applied himself in his own life, and how we can benefit from it or become more conscious. So, his early life. He was born in 1875 in Switzerland, and he was the son of a very poor family, the Swiss Reformed Church. And from a very young age, Carl was very much in contact with nature. He really loved being in nature. He loved plants, animals. He was very connected to the earth. And from a very young age, he identified that there was two personalities inside him. There was personality number one, he called, which was more external, what he called the persona. And it's that part of ourselves we project when we're in the world with others. Okay? It was the person he saw as the Swiss kid of the late 19th century. But he also saw another part of himself, what he called personality number two, which was more inner, that was more wise, that was much older, that he connected to much better. And there was these two personalities or consciousness that existed within us and within Carl. So from a very young age, he recognized that. And when he was 6, he learned Latin from his father, who was a very gifted linguist. And at the age of 12, he was in a fight at school. He got knocked out. He was unconscious for a little while. And he woke up and he says, this is the reason now I don't have to come to school anymore. So every time he walked to school or he did some homework, he would faint. So this was fantastic for young Carl, but he didn't have to go to school for 6 months. But he overheard his father say, I'm concerned about young Carl. I'm afraid that he won't be able to support himself in later life. I'm afraid he might be suffering from epilepsy. So he said, Carl said, I better pull up my socks and overcome this. So he went into the study. He went to open his school book and then he fainted. He got up again, he fainted. He got up again, he fainted. And after the third attempt, he was able to compose himself. He was able to overcome this. And from that day, he knew what a neurosis was because he experienced it. So when Carl was going to college, he had a great interest in philosophy and history. And these were things that really resonated with his personality number 2, with his inner self, because they addressed questions of meaning and purpose in life. What are we here for? What's the purpose of my life? These were subjects that really helped answer those questions. But he had also questions about the natural world, the world around him. And he's very much drawn to science, because science answers to questions like how things work. How does a smartphone work? How does a transistor work? He was interested in these two worlds. But he wanted to study archaeology, but he couldn't because the university didn't teach it. So he decided to go with medicine. And medicine was quite broad. It was quite a broad area, so he knew he could specialize into something that can combine these two worlds together. And he couldn't find anything. And one day he was about to apply to be a surgeon when he came across this book on psychiatry. And he said, this is what I've been looking for. Because for him, psychiatry combined the world of science, of biology, and it also combined the world of the spiritual, of values. And this was what he saw as a route into these two worlds, so it was psychiatry. He studied that. He went to Zurich. He entered his profession into a mental hospital. And he did something that was very different. He listened to people who were mentally ill. He tried to understand what was going on inside people. At the time, that wasn't really done because people just wanted to give a prognosis and add them as a statistic. So in order to help him understand this world of the psyche, he read many different psychiatrists. And psychiatry at that time wasn't very popular. But he came across the works of Freud. And for him, Freud was very interesting. And Freud explains that the human psyche has two parts. One is, I'll just draw it as a circle. One is what we're conscious of, or consciousness. Or we can call it ego consciousness. And he described what was below that, the personal unconscious. So there are certain things that we're conscious of, we know about, we know what we like, we know what we dislike, we're aware of our limitations. There are things we're conscious of. But for Freud, there are certain things we repress, that things that are uncomfortable to us, things we want to forget about, we just repress them. We put them into the unconscious or the personal unconscious. Jung wasn't happy with this explanation. He thought the unconscious, there was a lot more there. He thought there was a great potential in the unconscious, but he didn't have the experience yet to investigate or validate his hunch. And he had to wait till later to understand or to interpret this hunch or intuition he had. So he continued his work, and he published a book on association tests. And Freud bought this book. He was impressed by what he said, and he invited Jung to Vienna to have a talk. And when the first time they met, they talked for 13 hours straight without interruption. So it's a long time. Don't know how they did it. So they talked for 13 hours straight. And Jung said Freud was the first man of real importance in his life. He was a man of great depth and scope of vision. So, but Jung wasn't happy with Freud's teachings about the unconscious, because for Freud, the unconscious, everything that all the repressions in the unconscious are down to a sexual nature. So he creates everything to sexuality. And Jung thought this, okay, agreed with him a little bit, but he thought there was a lot more to the human being than just their sexuality. So he didn't want to argue with Freud because he still didn't know. He was still quite young. So later on, when he gained a little bit more experience, psychoanalysis, which is kind of the Freudian teachings, was gaining more popularity. And so was Jung's teaching, which is called analytical psychology. He was gaining more traction in the world. And they were invited over to America to give talks. And they went on a boat journey over to America, and they started analyzing each other's dreams. And Jung had a dream that was very impactful and important for him. He dreamt that he was in a house on the ground floor, I think, and that he discovered there was a basement to this house. So he went down into the basement. He went in down there. Okay, this looks like a basement, fair enough. But then he discovered there was this old slab of rock or something. And he pushed it aside and he went down deeper. When he went down deeper, I think there was another floor below it. And at the very, very bottom, there was 2 skulls. So he told this to Freud, and Freud, well, he interpreted it as sexual. It's all sexual. And Jung said, no, there's something more here. And this sparked his understanding of the collective unconscious. And for Jung, the unconscious, there is a personal unconscious, yes, but there was also a collective unconscious. So this is personal. And there's a collective unconscious. Personal is what belongs to us, the experiences we have, the memories we have. But the collective unconscious is something we inherit when we're born. It's something that is passed on through humanity. And the things that exist in the collective unconscious, well, one of the things that exist that I want to talk about is what's called archetypes. And archetypes are like primordial images or patterns or inherent potentiality that exists within every human being. And there is something that inspires us. There is something that wants us elevates us. And Plato helped Jung to understand these archetypes. An archetype, to help us understand this idea, an archetype is something like justice. Everybody in this room, I assume, wants justice in their life, wants to be just and wants to be treated justly. I've never met anybody who said, I want injustice, or argues for injustice. I've never heard that. Now, maybe our perception of what justice is, or how our image of it might be a bit skewed, but we all have an aspiration or inspiration to be more justice in the world. That's an example of an archetype. Another archetype would be love, beauty, compassion, fraternity. These are all universal values that exist within the collective unconscious. And it's all something that we have. And the unconscious is trying to help us awaken these universal values that exist within us. Some of these are already switched on or connected. We're also already connected to them. Because some people that we've met, I'm sure, are very courageous. Some people we've met, I'm sure, are very determined or have a great love. But all of them are not switched on inside. Some of them are a little bit, how do I say, like a light that's not totally switched on yet. Jung would say that the purpose of life, the purpose of his psychology was to start to connect closer with these archetypes and to connect more to our deeper nature or truer nature. He would explain that. Another archetype Jung explains is the hero archetype. It's very important to him. Do you think we have the hero archetype exists in our world today? Where does it exist? In the movies. Very good. Yeah. Pardon? Sports heroes, yeah. Sports hero. So we have these archetypes. What's the most successful movies of all time? The Avengers, Spider-Man, Batman. But these are all hero archetypes. When we go to the cinema, we're very much inspired by these movies. Our hero is someone who's not perfect, but he has a great determination to overcome something bad or something unjust. And he goes forth with what the tools he has, the limited tools he has, and he overcomes something. He fights and he's determined, and at the end of the movie, he's victorious. He's changed through that experience. He's become much better. And when we watch that, there's something deep inside of us, an archetype, there's something deep inside our nature that resonates with that and says, I want to be more heroic in my daily life. But then we come out of the movie and we go, well, how do I translate that inspiration into daily life? How do I do that? We have a problem translating that into excitement or energy into practicality. And Jung was aware of that. He knew that there was a translation problem, if you use that word. How do we actually translate that into daily life? And he talks later in his works about the individuation process of how we can actually become more heroic in our daily life. He talks about another archetype which is called the archetype of the self. And there is something inside us that wants to become more whole, that wants to become more united, that wants to become more connected inside. Because we tend to be, human beings tend to be a bit disconnected inside, a bit fragmented. So there's something inside ourselves that wants to become one. So these were the things Carl Jung was thinking about. And they were completely in opposition at that time to what Freud was thinking. So he knew there was going to be a clash. He knew there was going to be confrontation, and he didn't want this to happen because he was very much impressed by Freud. He saw him as kind of a father figure, but he thought it was important to stand up for what he thought was right. He had convictions that this was something that needed to be looked at and to investigate it further. But Freud wasn't having any of it, and eventually this parted ways. And Jung was kind of separated then from the whole psychoanalytical movement, and he went through a period of isolation because all his friends kind of disavowed him. I think maybe one or two people stood by him, but he was isolated. And this was a big shock to him, as he described himself, it was a moment of uncertainty in his life. He felt alone, and he asked himself, well, what do I do now? And he said, well, what have I learned? What have my teachings taught me? And he looks back at the hero archetype. And he asks himself a very important question. He says, what myth am I living by today? What myth is guiding my life? What does the word myth mean for you? When I said the word myth, what does it mean to you? What is a myth? A fairy tale. And is it true or false? In general, yeah, but in generally it's thought as something false. So sure, it's only a myth, it's not true. But Jung did a lot of investigation into mythology, and the word myth means true story. So myth is something true, but it's not true, literally true. It's true metaphorically or by analogy. It's true symbolically. A myth in traditional societies, and for Jung, a myth carried meaning and purpose in our life. A myth was a support that helps make our actions meaningful and of great value. And Jung realized that he didn't have a myth. He didn't have something that was really giving his life value and meaning. Because the world at that time, and still today, is more driven by the scientific approach to life. And science is fantastic methodology. It's given us smartphones. It helps us understand how things work. It's given us projectors and striped toothpaste. It's given us lots of things. But he asks the questions how things work. But it doesn't ask the question why. It doesn't give meaning. It doesn't give purpose. And this is something that Jung felt was very important that we should ask ourselves, not only individually, but collectively. Because if a society doesn't know what its meaning is, if a society doesn't know what its purpose is, what are we living for? Where are we going? So these are big questions he's asking, and he wrote down in one of his books, Civilizations in Transition. Jung describes that the main purpose and drive of his work is for us to become whole, for us to become more conscious. So it's trying to create a connection or unity between the way we think, feel, and act. So we're energized, we can know where we're going. So as a result of this fragmentation inside, it results in us being unsure of ourselves. We lack confidence. We have doubts. We have fears. This is a result of this fragmentation inside. The individuation process is helping to bring about a more balanced, a more whole, unified direction inside our psyche, inside ourselves. And this is something Jung studied in ancient philosophies, but ancient philosophies they talked about this as well. To become whole, or to become, used Socrates' words, to become happy, it's a journey, it's a process. We don't become happy by accident. There's something we have to build inside ourselves. It's not something that's just given to us. We have to work at building this inside ourselves. So to help explain this process, individuation process, I'm going to use an example to explain this. And I'm going to use the example of martial arts. And in the school we teach, we teach philosophical martial arts. And something very interesting happens when you enter into a fight with someone. So you've learned all the techniques, you've learned all the different moves, all the blocks, everything. But then you have to face someone, and you have to enter into a fight with them. And if you observe yourself, you'll notice things about yourself you weren't conscious of. You thought you're going to act in a certain way, but when you get into the fight, then you realize, oh, I'm actually doing things I wasn't even aware of. I'm doing things I'm unconscious of. So there's two behaviors. One is where we don't want to engage in a fight. We walk away, we try to deflect, and we don't want to engage in a fight. Eventually we walk into a corner and we're stuck. The other is where we get aggressive. I'm going to get you. I'm going to beat you. But the problem with that is we either end up hurting the other person, or we hurt ourselves because we go to an extreme. We lose balance and we bang our head against a wall or something. So we go to two opposites. Jung explains we have to combine the opposites that exist inside ourselves. We can ask ourselves the question, in life, am I passive? In life, do I avoid conflict? Do I avoid the battle? When I'm at work, do I avoid conflict? If there's something wrong at work, do I just avoid it and not confront the conflict? In my relationships, am I avoiding problems that are there? Do I not face them? In family and every other, do I avoid conflicts? Conflicts don't go away. They just keep getting bigger and bigger until something happens inside. There's a crisis. The other extreme is when we're aggressive. Are we aggressive in life? Not only in the battle, but am I aggressive at people? Am I aggressive at work? Aggression doesn't work very well because eventually it's going to cause more problems. It might fix something temporarily, but then later down the road it's going to cause a lot more problems. So Jung would say we have to combine these two opposites, for an example, to be more, for example, assertive. Because assertiveness is the harmony between passivity and aggression. Because sometimes we need to step back and say, okay, I understand what you're saying there, let's talk about it. Sometimes we need to go into action. No, I don't agree with that. Let's talk about this to find a solution. So it's only through the battle, it's only through the fight we discover who we are. It's only through the battle we discover the unconscious part of ourselves. Because we may have an image of ourselves in our mind, this is the way I am, this is the way I behave. But when we go into the battle of life, we start to discover who we really are, our real nature. And we start to discover our personal and our collective unconscious. And through that journey of facing ourselves, this line of consciousness goes down further. It keeps going down. And we become, as with time, with work, with effort, we become more whole. We grow in consciousness. And the result of growing in consciousness means we become happier. The Greek philosopher Socrates explains that happiness is not something we have, or happiness is not something we get from the external world and having things. Happiness is internal. It's something that exists inside ourselves. The more we connect with our inner being, our inner self, the more happy we are. I'm not saying it's nothing wrong with having things, having a nice car, having a mobile phone, if that's a problem. But if we place our being or sense of value or worth in external things, well then external things come and go and we don't really feel happy anymore. It gives a certain level of contentment. So happiness is something we build every day in our life. How? By facing our dragons, by facing our demons, by facing life. There's a great sense of happiness or victory when we face something that's hard, let's face something that's difficult, and we conquer it, we vanquish it, we overcome it. And that was the great hope of Carl Jung, because he saw that people become much happier when they face themselves and they're honest with themselves and they overcome something. And he thought that for humanity and for society to become better collectively, we all need to do that. The more happier people are in society, the happier society is. So I wish you a good journey on the individuation process.